Hello, I'm Ollie and this is CriminOlly, where I talk about crime, pulp, horror, that kind of thing. Today, prescient sci-fi, I want to talk to you about Snow Crash by Neal Stephenson. So Neal Stephenson is one of those authors I've been meaning to read for ages. And indeed, this book, Snow Crash, was part of my 50 books to read before I'm 50 project. The reason I picked this one rather than any of his other books is most of his books are huge, and many of them are part of series, and they're supposed to be incredibly complicated and detailed. They're supposed to be, very entertaining, but full of ideas and concepts and things like that. And I fancied something that was a little on the lighter side before tackling one of his more complex books. But Snow Crash definitely has a lot of complexity to it and a lot of fascinating ideas to it. And indeed, it's become a book that's been talked about quite recently because of one of those ideas. So it's the book that coined the term the Metaverse, which clearly has been co-opted recently by Mark Zuckerberg for his kind of vision of what the Meta-owned version of virtual reality will be like. So the Metaverse is a concept that we hear talked about all the time now. So fascinating to have read a book that's as old as Snow Crash, that came out in 1992, so over 30 years ago now, that predicted it. And the vision of the Metaverse that's presented in this book is one that it will be very familiar to anyone who's read or seen Ready Player One. So that kind of virtual world with people just wandering around, having avatars for themselves, so different skins and things like that, and interacting with each other in a virtual space as well as in the real world. So anyway, let's go back to the plot of the book. So it came out, as I say, in 1992. So only 8 years after William Gibson's book Neuromancer, which is the first book that was really about cyberspace and indeed I think kind of coined the term cyberspace. So this definitely feels like an evolution of some of the ideas in that book. There are a lot of themes and things like that in Neuromancer which come through in this as well, particularly the kind of influence of Asian culture and particularly Japanese culture on America. So that comes out in this book a lot in Snow Crash. In terms of the characters and the plot, so there's two main characters to it really. The main character, rather fantastically, is called Hero Protagonist, and he's like a hacker. So he's someone who has been a very successful programmer in the past. He's kind of fallen on hard times and makes a living by gathering information that he can sell to the highest bidder. So he's the main character, and then the other significant character is a teenage girl called YT, who is like a pizza delivery courier type person who ends up kind of working for the mafia, delivering stuff other than pizzas for them. And it's these two characters meet fairly early on in the story, and it becomes about the relationship between the two of them and this broader thing involving this drug called Snow Crash that they get involved in, and Snow Crash feels like something which is a kind of threat to the status quo, and Hero in particular is very keen to understand more about it. So that the plot of the book feels a lot like the plot of a kind of classic noirish thriller really, albeit with this kind of sci-fi element rolled over the top of it. So there's a lot of running around, talking to different people, getting into fights and things like that. It feels like a Raymond Chandler book at sometimes, and I know that William Gibson was a big fan of Raymond Chandler, so I don't know if that has kind of rubbed off onto Neal Stephenson as well. So the plot has a lot going on in it, and there are a lot of kind of big action scenes as well that take place in the Metaverse. So it feels at times a lot like The Matrix or something like that. There's kind of really huge action sequences where kind of impossible stuff happens, happens again and again. And that influence of Japanese culture on the book means that Hero, uses samurai swords and things like that, particularly in the Metaverse. So there's a lot of really entertaining action in the book. But what it's really about is ideas. So Stevenson's kind of sketching out of what this kind of virtual world might be is really fascinating. and he goes really deep on theories about kind of the spread of information, the dissemination of information amongst populations, and how the kind of spread of information in biblical times can, how you can draw analogies between that and the spread of information digitally today, or in the setting of the book. So he does that really interestingly, and he's definitely got some interesting stuff to say. I did feel like it got a bit bogged down in that discussion, particularly in the middle of the book. The pace does slow down a bit, and there's all these ideas for you to take in as a reader, and they are absolutely fascinating. But yeah, it does get a bit heavy, which does make me think twice about reading one of his even huger books. So this is not a short book; it's like 450 pages or something like that. But many of his books are over 1,000 pages, and I do worry that I would find them a bit too much. Any book really is about the intersection, I think, between the story, the characters, and the ideas and themes of the book. A good writer balances those things well. And as I said, I thought the plot of this, whilst it was somewhat derivative, is really, it's a really engaging plot. And the pacing, apart from that slowdown in the middle, the pacing is good as well. The ideas are, again, he goes a bit too heavy on them, but they are fantastic ideas. And he has, he's clearly had a real influence. This book in particular has clearly had a real influence on our culture and our understanding of the virtual world. Where this book does fall down a bit, I think, is in the characters. So, the two main characters who I've talked about, Hero and YT, but other characters in the book as well, do feel a bit two-dimensional at times. There are some nice parts with Hero, where there's a lovely bit where he talks about his relationship with his mother, and how he has, how he's someone who had made a lot of money through programming in the past, and he's used that money to look after his mum, and that's why he's now in the kind of situation he's in. So some of those character elements were well done. But yeah, overall, I didn't really find that I connected with the characters in a meaningful enough way that I really cared about what happened to them. So it's entertaining to watch everything play out and to digest those ideas and to witness these big kind of action set pieces. But I never felt as engaged with the characters as I might have done. One of the other things, speaking about characters, that's I think somewhat problematic about the book is the portrayal of YT. So she's a teenage girl. She's 15 years old, and she is definitely quite sexualised in the book, and there is quite an explicit sexual scene involving her as well. And I don't understand why Stephenson chose to make her 15. And, you could have had exactly the same character and her be 18, and have avoided some of those problems. And in particular, one thing that's I found quite peculiar in the book is the fact that her age is mentioned a lot. You cannot escape the fact that she is 15 years old. It comes up a lot, which did feel a little bit bizarre to me. So that side of it is a bit questionable, and I did feel that the portrayal of Asian culture is quite a limited one as well. So it's very much fascinated with electronics and kind of samurais and ninjas basically, and you see nothing at all of Asian culture apart from that. So Hero is biracial, he's half Asian, but there's very limited investigation into or discussion of his heritage beyond those two things. So that again felt like a bit of a missed opportunity, but probably quite typical of American literature and movies from the 90s. But yeah, those reservations aside, this is a really entertaining book. It's got some fantastic ideas in it. The plot is solid, and the action set pieces are fantastic. There's a great deal to enjoy, and it can be quite amusing at times as well. He's got a nice sense of humour too. There's a lot to recommend it. And if, like me, you've been daunted by Stevenson's absolutely mammoth volumes in the past as well, this is probably a good place to start with him. Okay, time for a random book from the shelf. So I mentioned it in the video, so it seemed appropriate to pull it out. Neuromancer by William Gibson, which I haven't read for years. I read it not long after it came out, certainly in the 80s. So I need to read this again. I remember being blown away by it when I first read it. So I hope you found that interesting. Let me know if you've read Snow Crash and what you thought of it. Let me know what you think of Neal Stephenson more generally. Let me know what you think I should try next by him. As I say, those big books do look like they might be a bit much for me. But if there's something that you think is a bit lighter, then do let me know. And as always, thanks very much for watching. Hope you're safe and well out there. Hope you're reading good stuff. And I'll speak to you again very soon. Cheerio.